everyone, I am Dana and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week we are talking about this kind of interesting balance that we have right now and kind of a choice point where we're planning coming back to in-person volunteering after the COVID shutdowns, and many organizations and their volunteer teams are still paused for the cause. They're still furloughed, on hold, only doing remote work. So if you are struggling with this balance or with this timing, or you're starting to form a plan with your agency to bring volunteers back to some or all of their in-person roles, then these Tuesday tips hopefully will help you out. And because Tuesday tips are only a few minutes long and just a way to get you thinking about something or trying a couple of new tips or approach, there's a lot more resources in the video description below to do a deep dive and to look at some models of bringing volunteers back in person that have worked with agencies so far, depending on their mission and the work that they do. Now, I found this slide very, very helpful. I've done a lot of webinars on this topic and a deep dive. And it's really important to think about these considerations, not just the 3 C's of happy volunteers, comfort, convenience, connection, but also coping with crisis, and specifically the COVID pandemic crisis and how we've had to adapt to things. Having lots of compassion, having very, very clear communication with your volunteers and all of the employees that may work with them so that they understand the plan going forward. Ideally, everything that you're doing in your plan to bring volunteers back in person is based on the latest science, the latest information, and some mix of community input from the volunteers themselves. I'd even recommend forming a committee if you haven't already. Have a committee made up of some volunteers that can help to do the planning and the return to work rollout and what that looks like. We also want to balance community input with the comfort and the safety of everyone involved, and to make sure that whatever safety guidelines and health guidelines are in place for everyone's protection are followed, and that there's accountability for not going along with those rules and guidelines if people want to come back to in-person volunteering. So it's been a really delicate balance. It's going to not get much easier in the months to come, so hopefully this video helps a little bit. It's very, very important to be strategic, intentional, and clear in the why and the how of bringing volunteers back in person, and having very transparent and honest communication about that plan and why this group or this role or this task is in the first tier to come back, or rotating time, or this many people are allowed in the workplace and not more than that. Just really important to make that as clear as possible and for people to understand the reasoning that is behind it and the science that is behind it. Also, don't make assumptions. Make sure to ask people what they're comfortable with as well. So see who, where, and how people are comfortable returning to tasks. This has been an unbelievably difficult year for so many people, and life priorities change. If they've stopped volunteering or been on pause with your organization while it's been paused for the cause, and there isn't a plan for people to return back to volunteering, a lot of folks have just moved on. They're doing something different. They have different priorities in life. They're taking care of themselves. They're taking care of other family members or friends who are not doing so well or can't cope without care. So just, again, having a lot of grace and compassion around how people are engaging with your agency. And many people probably love working remotely. That opened up a lot more access to more kinds of volunteering and more opportunities and more people being able to participate in online trainings than they could in person and things like that. So keeping in mind that a hybrid model may be the way to go for the next little while, or permanently going forward. Keep what worked really, really well in how you adapted in 2020, and then come back to in-person roles as much as works for your agency and that makes sense for the volunteers themselves. If you are bringing people back in waves or tiers, which is a very common model. The business world is using that. A lot of tech companies and offices are doing that model. Again, make sure people understand why they're in that tier, that it doesn't feel like an otherness or a discrimination if someone is the last to come back versus the first or second group to come back, and that they still feel engaged and connected to the work and the mission and the rest of the team as much as possible while we're in this transition time. For those who are in a final group or who may stay remote permanently, they may want to do that. People may self-select to be like, I don't ever want to come back in person. I want to continue doing this. Have flexibility. Again, grace, compassion, patience, flexibility is key right now to continue with that model. And we also want to respect that there can still be plenty of remote opportunities. We want to continue whatever remote or micro-volunteering or fun size or bite-size opportunities that have developed in the last year or so, that those can continue, that those aren't shut down, that new batch of volunteers or people who are longtime volunteers who pivoted into these new roles can continue to do what they want to do in a remote or online or virtual way from now on as well. So this is really about making that clear plan, knowing the steps, knowing the stakeholders involved, and communicating as clearly as possible for why and when these steps and this timing is occurring. So I hope you found these Tuesday tips helpful. Again, a lot more info in the video description below. And I also will link some Tuesday tips to managing up after this video, because that's really helpful if you're not the prime decision maker for how volunteers are being redeployed back to in-person things in your organization. So I'm always here to help you develop your voice and advocate for yourself and the team of volunteers that you manage in your organization. So we hope you've enjoyed this Tuesday tips, and we'll have a lot more coming up next week. Thanks.